I articulated yesterday that I do not want Notre Dame to join the Big Ten. I think the healthiest model for college football, Gator, is that the Power Five, which essentially supplies the playoff with their 4 teams every year, if we're moving towards super conferences, if you will, then the Power Five becomes a Power Four. And somebody falls by the wayside. But there has to be a balance of power. There has to be the conferences. You would prefer that there are strong teams in all conferences. So personally, that would mean I would love Notre Dame in the Big Ten, but it would make sense if USC and UCLA stayed in the Pac-12 to keep a balance of power out west.
Right.
And have some hybrid Pac-12, Big 12 survive. But now that the Big Ten has added USC and UCLA, and if there's no going back, right, if that is locked in, and by all accounts it is, although in the back of my mind I can't help but think, I'm not sure that this is ever going to happen. But if the Big Ten is sticking with USC and UCLA, and we understand why, it's about the LA television market, then I want Notre Dame to go to the ACC, full-time ACC member, and strengthen that conference. And they should probably add West Virginia while they're at it, which makes sense from a geographical standpoint. It's also a reasonably strong program. It's not a great program, but it's the kind of program that once every 10 years gets themselves, or once every 8 years or something, gets themselves where you'd think they might be in the playoff picture, right? I mean, they've competed on that level. They've played in major bowl games with, they went out, was it the Major Harris? Was that their quarter? Yeah. And they had some Rich Rod teams that flirted with it. And anyway, that would bring some stability and some strength to the ACC. And then, again, a Big 12, Pac-12 morphing together. I've been uncomfortable all along with the idea that the Big Ten and the SEC, with no real governing body, are basically swallowing up the rest of college football, that might have no end until all that's left standing is a massive Big Ten and a massive Southeastern Conference. And I've had a problem kind of putting my finger on what bothers me about it, but I've come up with 2 things. I'm not against change, okay? I want to make that clear. But I don't like, I think a 4-strong conference dynamic with regionality makes the most sense. But, Gator, it's when your conference is so big, you can go years between playing all the teams. Like years. And if we start getting into 20-team conferences, you will go years between playing some of the teams on the other side, whatever the other side is. But then I realized the other thing that I really don't like about this is I feel like there's an element of eliminating the competition through administrative moves. Not on the field, but you are eliminating competition for the national championship by almost rendering everyone who's not in the Big Ten or the SEC as irrelevant. And that is being done administratively, not on the gridiron. And I don't like that. I'm uncomfortable with that.
No, I get it. I think if Notre Dame is going to join a conference, it's got to be the Big Ten, though. It makes sense geographically. It makes sense for Notre Dame to keep up with their rivalries. It makes too much sense, and it's made too much sense for 30 years. I understand what you're saying about the ACC, but I feel like the ACC, they're working towards 3 major conferences, it feels like. I think the ACC is going to get attacked by the SEC. I think there's already some overtures with the SEC trying to add Florida State and Clemson. What happens to the rest of those teams, I'm not sure, but it feels like the Big 12, there are reports that they're in contact with some Pac-12 teams, which is interesting, like Arizona State, Colorado. and Utah. Those are some teams that are being rumored to talk with the Big 12. So if the Pac-12 is going to be dissolved, Big 10 will take some teams, Big 12 takes some teams, and it looks like maybe the ACC gets dissolved. Does that go to Big 10 and SEC? And where are we left after that? I'm not sure.
Well,
I get what you're saying. You want to have balance.
Yep.
So it's not just two major conferences that get all the teams or get all that play, but
when you start getting into conferences that are so huge that you just don't play almost ever, other people in the conference, I don't really see the point. But Gator, with that said,
let me just add to this, because if it does get to that point where you have 40-team conferences or 30-team conferences,
right,
whatever, obviously there'll be a number of divisions or pods or however you want to word it. The likelihood is that affects the bowl season, right? That you totally scrap the plans we have of a normal bowl season, and also conference championships. Maybe these pod games, the pod champions, those end up being your bowl
literally
season.
have like conference semifinals and finals. But yeah, I feel like nothing. By the way, there is no consideration of what this means for the bowls. Like nobody's even talking about the bowls. That is a dying college postseason format that we see, and I don't hear anybody saying, well, what does it mean for this bowl or that bowl? I mean, the Big Ten just took the two power team biggest names out of the Pac-12. Rose Bowl be damned, right?
Well, but we watch bowl season every year, and once you get into the second and third week of December, you're watching these games being played, several games a night, and for whatever. Nobody's at these games. Yep. Nobody goes to them.
But they get
and
TV
everybody
ratings.
asks the questions, how on earth do these things stay alive? It's about TV. So I feel like with a bowl season, that they don't care about it right now because they know it's going to work itself out with conference championships and semifinal games, and that'll replace the bowl.
So here are the comments, though. ESPN, it's a college football podcast. They had an emergency pod last Friday with, I can't remember who the host was, but Heather Dinich was on, and she had spoken with Jack Swarbrick in the spring and happened to bring up what would it take for Notre Dame to give up its independent status and join a conference. And he had said there were three things. One was the loss of a TV partner.
Okay.
Which I don't think NBC is in any rush to get rid of Notre Dame. And if they were, somebody would jump on it. In fact, in this day and age, that somebody might be Amazon or Apple.
Right.
And bringing large trucks of money to the table. So that probably isn't in play here. Two is...
But NBC is also in play with the Big Ten contract.
It could be a marriage made in heaven. Two is the loss of a fair route to the playoff. So if the dynamic was set up that being an independent made it difficult or impossible to make the playoff, which could be happening if the Big Ten and SEC keep taking up teams, Notre Dame might run out of quality schools to schedule.
Right.
Although they have this weird partnership with the ACC, but that doesn't feel like it's a pressing need, but it could be a down-the-road issue with Notre Dame. And the third thing Swarbrick said would get Notre Dame to join a conference is significant financial consequence. If they kept an independent status, would there be significant financial consequence?
Say, for instance, if they make, just throwing a number out there, if they make $100 million from being on NBC, but if they were to join the Big Ten, if that number goes up to $150 million, the consequence of them not joining the conference is losing out on $50 million. Is that big enough?
Yeah. And that might be the push for Notre Dame.